Hello everyone, my name's Jacob, and today we're going to take a look at a game I played in tournament recently. I had played against this opponent one other time in the past, and he beat me in an end game conversion where he was up a pawn and wasn't much I could do. I'm not super studious about end games, so not a big surprise that I lost that one, but I was hoping going into this game that we wouldn't have a repeat of last time. And so I was hoping to not let him put me into a similar end game position. But as you can probably tell by my tone, that didn't work out so well. So I did lose this game. I'm playing as black here. He's playing as white. And let's just take a look at the opening moves here to begin with. So he starts with the ready opening. He starts with knight f3. Now, I don't have too much opening prepped. I don't study openings that much. I know a little bit about the ones that I do play. So usually against like e4, I'll play either the French or the Sicilian. Against knight f3, I just decided I was going to launch towards Sicilian. I was going to say, hey, if you want to go e4, we can just do this the usual way. He doesn't. Instead, he goes c4, just sort of declining my invitation. And according to the computer, this is an English symmetrical variation. Sure, absolutely. I don't know anything about it. So following up, I just decided to do some normal solid development on the king side and get castled. So not much to say about these next couple moves here. I was probably going to play these basically against anything he did. And being that he's more of an end game player, it's not a great surprise to me that he chooses a more quiet opening just like he did last time. So I get castled here, and then he does go ahead and try to break open the position with d4. Now, this is where I'm going to put a pause on things first. So, a little bit like I was talking about earlier, I didn't want this game to go straight into an end game. I wanted to try and play a sharper middle game position, and that didn't really work out for me. I think this is one of those moments where if I had chosen a different line, I probably could have gotten a sharper variation. And that's one of the takeaways that I am trying to get from this game. So, the move I make isn't a mistake. I just go ahead and I take on d4, and that's because in a lot of the Sicilian games I play, not taking on c4 or on d4 straight away is just a bad idea. So I've had those games, I've been punished for doing that, and I didn't want to see that happen here. So I just took straight away. Now, instead, there are lots of viable moves here. It's still early on in the game. There are lots of viable moves. Instead, I could have played something a little bit sharper, like d5, for instance. So if you go d5 here, it kind of looks like chaos. But if we try and break down exactly what's going on here, we can see that these variations are a little bit sharper, but nothing to be scared of. So the most natural continuation, in my opinion, is just if he were to capture, because if he captures, I can't recapture with queen. Am I just going to retake with knight? What are we going to do? So if I retake with knight and he takes this way, it looks like he's got the two attackers on my knight. And that's, I just think, a logical line, but simple calculation before I play d5 would say, okay, well, this is actually bad. Because from this position, I can actually just take his knight on c3, and then if he recaptures, well, now he has these double pawns on the c file, and that's not so great for him. On top of that, if I take his queen, then he goes uncastled. Okay, but we don't go down that route. Instead of capturing on d5, let's say if I go d5, let's say he does something else like d takes c5, the other capture here. So if he captures like this, the computer says you have a couple different lines. And I wish I would have spent a little bit more time on this, not looking at the computer lines, but I didn't even entertain it over the game, or over the board, I'm sorry. I didn't even entertain it there. And so whenever I was looking at an analysis, this was again one of those moves I just skipped right over. It wasn't until I did look at it with a computer that I even stopped and thought, hey, I actually could have done something even as early as here. So from here, you have a couple main moves. The one the computer likes the most is just queen a5. So if you go queen a5, you're pinning the knight. You're also threatening to pick back up this pawn, but careful, there are tactics involved with that. And instead of picking up this pawn, if he just does something natural like castle, you would actually want to go ahead and take on c4. This is the correct line. So if you take on c4, this isn't so bad. You are looking to pick this up soon. And the computer top line is actually to go queen d4. Anything else, and you get to develop as normal as black and things are going okay. And if you go queen d4, I think this would be a weird move for a human to make. I think it's more prone that he would make a mistake here or do something slight inaccurate. I mean, a move like queen d4 here allows the very natural knight c6. You can also even go knight to d7. If you go knight f to d7 here, you're getting the punch towards the queen. And this doesn't look, this doesn't look terribly bad. It's not like my computer says that you may have some sort of a kingside attack going if you come over here, but nothing solid for either side, still normal development. But I think this would be inviting really solid development from black. And so I would have been welcome to see this. But I didn't even go down this line at all. I instead, all the way back here, I just went ahead and took automatically. And so in the game, he just took right back. And now we're just sort of in this open, calm position. There's no complications. Everybody's plans are simple. And so I just continue with my normal development. He takes. I take back with the D pawn. Again, if I wanted to avoid going straight into an endgame, it probably would have been better to take back with the B pawn. But my principled ass just really wanted to take with the D pawn and say, okay, well, now I've opened up this diagonal for my bishop. I'm going to get more comfortable development. Better to develop my bishop this way than it is to develop him this way, where he's probably just going to be biting on a rock, because this guy can always just go b3, and then it's going to be weird for me to break up the position on the queen side. So I didn't long term like that idea. I preferred this, and I figured if he didn't castle straight away, I might be able to get him uncastled or make his knight move backwards. Just a small advantage out of the opening, which would have been nice, but this isn't really the route to go if that's how you're trying to play the game. So he castles, just very solid. And then this is actually my first think of the game. So on those other moves that I played, I basically played these automatically. I double checked, made sure I wasn't, getting pushed around by something like e4 straight away, because it's pretty clear he wants to play that. And I made sure if any of those kinds of shenanigans weren't happening. But after I got past that, like I said, I basically played these moves automatically. And so at this point, I wanted to come up with a plan. I was saying, okay, how am I going to develop? Where's my light square bishop going for one? He's the last minor piece I need to develop. How am I going to get my rooks in the game? What am I doing with my center pawns? Am I ever going d5? What am I doing? Now, here, I think the most direct kind of aggressive route is a move the computer recommends, which is bishop e6. Now, it's a little weird looking, but what it actually does is you're targeting this weak pawn. And, it's pretty straightforward how you could defend it, just b3. However, this immediately, isn't giving you a long-term initiative for an attack, but it is just a step, I think, in a sharper direction where you're saying, okay, here's a threat, respond to it, And I'm not trying to put too much stock in these lines, because it's like, okay, he goes b3, and what do I do next? Should I go like, rook e8 and just play something slow again? Or should I be really aggressive and do something like b5? Instead of looking at exact moves like that, I just think one quick correction here, going bishop e6, throwing a punch and saying, you have to react to me. Now your knight's weak. What am I going to do next? Maybe I'm going queen a5 to try and attack that knight. Maybe I'm trying to pin that knight. Maybe I'm trading queens. A lot of different directions you can go here, but I think this would have been a move that better suited my long-term plan for the game, rather than the move I actually played in the game, which was the very simple bishop d7. And so I go bishop d7 here with the idea of going queen c8 next move, and then trying to trade off the light square bishops, because he has his, fianchettoed, and it's very strong, and I don't want to deal with it. And I think this is the wrong plan, because this light square bishop, while it is fianchettoed and a strong defender, isn't doing much aggressively. Like, it's just staring at the c6 pawn, and it's not really affecting the game that much. Now, he wants to get in this e4 push, which is good for him, and the light square bishop does support that. But as far as attacking the pieces of my camp, it's not actually doing that much. And so I don't think it was all that important for me to have to trade it off in these circumstances. So I don't know if he just didn't see my plan, or if he was just developing normally. It is the top move, but just queen b3, this is what I anticipated. Queen c8 covers the pawn, as well as going for this plan here. Now you may be saying to yourself, okay, well, if I go bishop here, and he takes and I take, aren't I dropping the pawn? Yes, I am, which is why I'm going to do some more prep here in a second. He goes e4 straight away. The computer doesn't love that, but I'm not going to get too hung up on it. What this really made me want to do is play e4, which is bad. That's kind of closing up my king side, and my dark square bishop's not going to have the view that he wants to have from there. So I ultimately decided I didn't want to play e5. I wanted to be more active. I wanted to try and develop my other pieces, and I wanted to keep with my plan. So I just followed through with my plan. They say this is an inaccuracy, go straight back, but that's okay. Okay, so if he takes, I take, and then he could take this pawn, but I figured after he takes that pawn, I can go here. I get some good development. Really, that would also be dropping this pawn, but I figured I had knight g4. I think there's some good lines here with knight g4 in specific. So, you can't take back, because, if you take, this is a force mate. Yeah. And this is what I looked at in the game. So you can't go down this route as white. There's nothing you can do to guard against the threat of queen taking here for mate. So you can't do that. Instead, he doesn't take, he goes bishop g5. And so this is to take care of the knight problem, which is after we trade, then he, if he's got the knight gone already, then he can take the pawn without any worry. So in response to that, I just go ahead and trade off the bishops. But I could have left the game a little bit more complicated. This is another moment where I think there are some better moves for me to have picked from. Um, I think, just for instance, so guarding this, it looks a little passive, but you can go something like this, which is essentially the idea I come up with later. So you can go for this. What you can also do, and this is technically what I went for in the game, but what you can also do is defend this pawn so that you can move the knight straight away. Because right now, I would love to, move my knight like to d7, for instance, just to keep it in the game. But then I'm dropping this pawn. He's hitting my rook. And I may even be able to go down that route just by sacrificing a pawn, but I didn't love the look of it. Actually, in fact, I don't think you can, because this would just drop the bishop. So yeah, you definitely can't move the knight. Like maybe something like this would technically be better, but then he could take, and now it's a little weird, right? So I didn't want to drop this pawn, and so I was like, okay, just play very solidly. I don't want to go into that. Instead, what I play is just capture, capture, and then I go rook e8. So with rook e8, I'm defending that pawn. I'm saying I will move my knight now, and you won't have this capture. Not a big deal. But this gives him a little bit too much initiative, I think. So he goes rook a to d1. So rook a to d1, getting on the open file. Very strong, obviously. And now it's a little awkward, because it's like, well, am I going to challenge him straight away with my rook? No, because I just moved my rook here to defend the pawn. But I also didn't want to move my knight away straight away. My plan here was I wanted to defend this pawn with something that wasn't my queen, so that I can actually activate my queen. I didn't hate the idea of him trading the bishop for the knight, which is why I didn't want to move the knight. I was like, no, go ahead. But this is again a moment where, instead of trying to play for, my bishop will be better in the end game versus your knight, like if I would have just played to keep my knight on the board, I maybe could have kept complications up in the game. So like, if instead I go knight d7, which is a perfectly reasonable move in this position, I'm eyeing up the c5 square to throw a punch at the queen. I'm also eyeing up e5, which is just a very good outpost for the knight. I can maybe even provoke him into playing f4 to try and kick it away, which might not work straight away, but the idea being that he'd open up his king side for even more of an attack, especially with my queen being on these light squares. That could be very good for me. So those are some of the ideas that I was looking at after the game that I'm like, okay. And I thought about them during the game, but I was really dead set on, I know this guy wants an end game. If I can get him to trade the bishop for the knight, I feel like I should, be able to make something happen off of that. I don't know why. I've never proven that in a game, so probably shouldn't have such high hopes, but that was the idea. So instead, I go rook b8, guard the pawn so I can move my queen. Now I want to go like queen g4 and provoke him into just trading instead of like bringing his bishop back or something. I feel like most players are just going to trade it off. And so that's what I was looking for. He's preparing to double rooks on the d file, and I think also a move that he's kept in mind, and we'll see it come back up later, but is this rook f3 move. Especially with the queen being on this diagonal and the pawn being undefended, this can be a really big intersection square if he can get his rook on f3 and push like the c pawn to c5, which is part of what I try to deal with later on. But so yeah, in response to this, I go b5, which I didn't think was a great move, but this was basically the same concept as from this earlier point if I had played knight d7, where, okay, you can take the pawn, but I feel like I'm getting good piece activity for it. And so that's kind of my thought process with this b5 move. I'm saying, okay, I'm completely fine with you taking the pawn, but if you do take it, you have to contend with these guys on open files, and I thought they had quite a bit of strength. I just misread the situation basically after he goes rook c1. I figured he would, but I was thinking, okay, that's undefended. He can't move with something like this because then he's dropping it. So it's essentially a pin. But then the more I looked at the situation, the more it was relevant that my queen didn't really want to stay there. There wasn't much for it to be gained on this file. I mean, he's probably just going to do something really simple like queen here or rook back or something and guard the rook, and then I'm going to be across from rook that I don't want to be across from. So I go queen b7 instead, try and hit this pawn and say, okay, well, if you move carelessly, I'm just going to take it. But he just takes away my other attacker. I thought this was actually still working for me. I thought I could take back with the e pawn here and open up this attack on the pawn. But I decided after, if I were to do something like this, he can just go something like this. And then even if I were to sack the exchange, I didn't love it. for a multitude of reasons. Yeah, I mean, here it's like just actually straight up losing because of this, but I didn't even look tactically at this. I just, figured, okay, well, I've sacked the exchange, but I don't really have anything to show for it at all. And my bishop is just absolute trash. So I think it's pretty obvious that you should just retake with bishop here, but that was just sort of my thought process. Is to initially I thought I was going to retake with pawn to get the pressure, but I was like, oh, I don't really have that. And so that's just a good example of just sort of like, I don't know, not paying attention positionally to what's really going on. Um, Instead, on this previous move, instead of moving the queen, I maybe could have tried to make something happen here and moving my knight somewhere else, but then rook f3 is a problem. So queen b7 it was. He did go for the trade. I take back with bishop. Things are still even, but this is where it starts to get a little uncomfortable. So he goes knight d5, and that's, like I said, getting uncomfortable because he's looking to infiltrate with the rook. And if he can infiltrate with the rook, then I'm really disliking my position. But surprisingly, that being said, there's a part of me that kind of wishes I would have let him infiltrate with the rook just to mix things up and try and keep things complicated. Instead of doing so, I just trade off more pieces and go closer to an endgame, which is, again, the first thing I didn't want to let happen. He just takes on f6. I have to recapture with the pawn. And now not only am I in an endgame with him, but I have double pawns, which is bad. These two are separated, which doesn't feel great. And he's immediately trying to force a queen trade. So you can actually get away with taking the queen trade here, but I didn't love it because he got the passed pawn. I figured it was a draw, but I was like, okay, well, now I'm in the end game. I didn't want to be here, but let's see if I can outplay him nonetheless. So I go queen b6, which is it is a good move. Avoiding the queen trade, protecting my pawns, staying active, all that's completely fine. He tries to force the issue with queen d4, and this is just like a draw. Like I probably should have just went back and like maybe we just would have went for a draw. But instead, I did not spend enough time and I just blunder straight away. So I go queen c6, just not realizing that he can just make the very calm and simple rook c3. And this isn't a losing move per se. It does give white quite the advantage, but it's, I'm not like down a rook or anything in case anybody didn't catch it. You can still defend the rook with the queen, but this is the route we go down. And then he has two options here. Both of these pawns are undefended. And so which one should you take? You should take the A pawn. So you should take the A pawn because you have these two passed pawns. Well, one of them will be passed. And you can play around this isolated pawn on b5. And it'll be hard for black to defend it while simultaneously trying to counterattack. And then he'll still have this weak doubled pawn structure on the king side that he can't really do anything about. So instead, he goes queen takes f6, which while I am down a pawn still, this does actually give me opportunities for a draw. So the engine still holds this at about even. Over the board, however, I definitely didn't think this was even. In my own analysis, looking back on it, I did find lines where I was like, okay, nothing specific. Basically, what you do is you just make a lot of boring moves where you're just keeping your defenses up, keeping your queen active, or counterattacking a pawn, and you probably will come out with a draw in this. But we both had plenty of time on our clock, so I felt this game was just going to go on for a long time. And so we make these very slow moves with our queen, and I try to advance my queen side so that if he ever slips up, I'll have a winning advantage in just a couple moves. I don't want to take the queen trade. I know that's bad for me because he's up a pawn. So I go queen b4, trying to stay active and attack his pawns. He pushes them. I say, okay, we'll trade a set. I just want to get my pawn as far advanced as possible so that, like I said, if I can ever get his a2 pawn, I'll be just a couple moves away from queening and having a winning advantage in case he ever blunders. So I go back just in case he wants to, make some silly move like this and drop his pawn. Just always got to keep the threats alive whenever you're defending. He does not. A better move in this situation, I should point out, is king g7, which I thought looked a little silly because I figured I was just going to get checked and have to move away, or, he's going to try and, I figured he'd just push me back onto the rank. But the good thing about it is that king g7 makes it so that whenever he does recapture on e6, it doesn't hit with check. So it's just a slight improvement, not a giant deal, but it is just something to keep in mind. I go king h8 here just to defend the pawn on h7. You can go king f8. Either one's fine. Because you can defend both pawns no matter what, actually, just because of checks with the queen and stuff. But I just went king h8 just to keep it solid, but perhaps that's a little bit too passive. I'm not going to beat myself up too much for the endgame play here, but I do just want to realize that even though I'm a pawn down here, this is very drawable. I can actually draw this game, which is not something I had in my head over the board. So Again, he's just staying centralized with his queen, always looking for an opportunity to go like check, check, and checkmate me on f8 while simultaneously defending his pawn. I'm just getting my pawn on a different colored square, trying to advance it so that, like I mentioned before, if at all possible, I will just run it down the board. And I like my queen position here because I'm cutting off his king. So his king, can't cross these 3 lines. So it's just going to be confined to kind of this small little area he's got going on, unless he wants to start pushing pawns senselessly and come all the way around, which I figured would just give me chances or would just take more time. So I was ready to invite that. He goes for a check and he's trying to box in my king a little bit. And here's really where I make the real mistake, is right here with Queen B1. So Queen B1 was an attempt at getting him, hoping that he was going to lose focus, which is just silly because he's not going to make any other moves except for queen moves. But if he would have lost focus and done something silly like, like this, then it is losing immediately. My idea was, in case anybody didn't catch it, to go check here. And then no matter what he does, he is dropping the queen. I'd pick up the queen and then, and then I'm winning. So that was the idea. I was hoping I might get him with losing focus because, like I had mentioned, at this point, I actually thought I was already lost. I just thought he was just going to clean up the game slowly, which maybe he would have, but this isn't the way to go about it. So he follows suit with just some checks, put me back in the corner. And then what he's wanting to do is he's wanting to get to f7 and threaten f8 mate. He goes queen f2 or king f2 prophylactically just to stop my incoming queen d3 from hitting with check so he can get there 1 move sooner. I went queen d3 with this idea of going queen d8. And then this is where the big blunder happens. So he goes king h3, which I thought looked a little weird. And without actually calculating any lines, because I was down on time and I was trying to get him to burn more time. So at this point, I think I'm down to like 6 minutes and he's at like, I think he's at like 7 minutes. And I'm like, okay, like this is plenty of time to close this out, basically no matter where the position's at. But I was just hoping, maybe he would burn a little bit more time than need be. So I go queen g8. And I really should have just calculated that this didn't work, but I just didn't. And I won't even bother explaining it ahead of time. You'll just see why it doesn't work because the moves are pretty straightforward. Goes to centralize his king. I go to centralize mine. And then here's where it was evident to me that it didn't work. He just has opposition. And so there's no way. So opposition isn't everything, but there is no way for me to get to this pawn and defend it. Any move I make with my king, like here, he just matches. And if I try to get over here, he just slowly gets in front of the pawn. And then, let's say I go back the other way to try and do something over here. It doesn't matter. He can just very calmly march his pawn down. And I mean, at this point, I would be far too far away to catch it. There's no way I can make anything happen by marching my own pawns up. I think everybody can see this is a pretty clear and easy victory for white. So yeah, you get it. It may have went something like that, but from that point, once we matched kings in the middle, I just resigned. Game's over. Wasn't going to go anywhere, and that's how it ended. So my big takeaways for this game, a bit of what I already spoke about earlier, was just to play more dynamically, to play sharper in games when I'm not trying to put it to an end game. Really try and focus on keeping pieces on the board and going down more complicated lines where my opponents have to calculate. I do think I actually am a pretty good calculator whenever I'm in positions where I need to. But I oftentimes just don't put myself in those positions lately. I don't know why. I've been playing much more positional, which is fine, but I think it's more born out of like a psychological unwillingness to complicate the game, which that I don't think is right. I don't think necessarily playing the positional is bad. I think I'm still okay at it, but I just need to be willing to complicate the game and to understand what my win condition really is. So that's really what I wanted to look at for this game. Obviously, it was pretty dumb to trade queens there at the end. If I would have just kept making queen moves, probably could have drawn the game out. So also don't do that. And also probably just study end games so that like I just know immediately that this queen trade isn't going to work instead of going for it for some reason. Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't tell you what my reasoning was. I just thought, okay, his king is over, and after we trade, mine's 1 over. Maybe that will work. And I didn't bother to calculate, which it would have been a fairly simple calculation. So I don't know what else I would have played, but just anything is probably fine. Just as long as you stay on the 8th rank, you can probably just go, yeah, queen c8 check. I mean, there can't be anything wrong with this, right? Doesn't have any way to block and force a queen trade or anything like that. Even if he comes forward, he's not making much progress. So that would have been a better route to go down. And then we could have kept playing with no time on our clock, and maybe we would just agreed to a draw. That being said, I did offer him a draw at one point in the game, and he did decline it. I believe it was right before the queen trade. I think at after queen, yeah, here on this move, I went queen b6 and then offered him a draw, which is a little silly. It's like, you know, if you're gonna offer a draw, maybe just take and take. But I played queen b6 with the idea of keeping the queens on the board, with the understanding that if he comes back, you know, we could just trade a move later, and then he doesn't have the passed pawn, or we could just go back and forth, and it would just be a draw by repetition. But he didn't take it. He played on, and he got the win. So clearly he made the right decision. And I think he probably also remembered our first game, which was equally frustrating for me, because to lose to the same person twice is, you know, it sucks, but to lose to them twice in the same manner really says something about you. You know, you can't be doing that. So anyway, that's it for this game. Thank you for anybody who watches it. I'm really just doing this analysis for my own benefit, but I also like making YouTube videos, so I figured I would go ahead and put one up. So if you enjoyed it, hit the like button. If you want to subscribe, you can. I plan on doing more of these. Otherwise, I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.